So I have the grant doctor in the building, as I affectionately call her, Dr. Shandra Williams. She's somebody that has been on both sides of this thing. I know she's going to explain it. I'm not going to take none of her fire. Please give it up for Dr. Shandra Williams, the grant doctor.
Oh, well, hello, everyone. Can you all hear me okay? All right, so Randolph has introduced me with a high caliber. Randolph gave me that glowing introduction. I have written quite a few grant proposals. Most of them have been in higher education, nonprofit, schools. Very few have been for-profit, but I have worked in for-profit. But I'll be honest with you and say that the landscape has changed dramatically. And even my presentation today, when I first agreed to speak, was leaning in one direction, but since then I've sort of made some changes to it. And along the way, I'll explain why. But one reason is because I've had a lot of calls from former clients from way back as 20 years ago with respect to a lot of questions. And for-profit grants and low-interest loans or no-interest loans, your best bet is to go through the Small Business Administration at this point because of the swift changes that are currently being made. Unless you're on the inside, you don't know from day to day what those changes are. And that's the best advice that I can give you. I've referred quite a few individuals directly to the Small Business Administration. And most public colleges and universities will have a Small Business Development Center that is free. Those guys are connected on a daily basis with the Small Business Administration. So I just wanted to get that out there because I know how many of you all would be looking for profit grants for your for-profit, right? So I know that's generally the case when I do speak in the public sector, but as of right now, the best bet is to reach out to a Small Business Development Center, maybe FAMU, Florida State University, University of Florida. One of those should have, does anyone know, because I'm based in Alabama, so I know, does anyone know if there's a Small Business Development Center? It is? Okay, all right, UNF. So reach out to them and establish a relationship with them. Their services are free. And a lot of people have really been successful by going through them. So the presentation, I'm demystifying grant writing for success, and part of that will come with your questions. We are going to try to understand the essential connections within a proposal. And I only have one of those slides because most of the questions that I receive now has to do with the current landscape of grants management. Okay, so here are the 4 areas that I'll briefly cover. And along the way, if you have any questions about any of those, we'll answer those on the back end. And I'm gonna give a lot of time for questions. So key connections in a proposal, the current state of affairs in grants management, the most in-demand grant management consulting requests. That's something that I just added to presentations because, of the nature of questions and demands or requests that I receive. And then finally, I have a link to a LinkedIn article on the resilience of grant writers. Now, I add that because how many of you all have written a grant proposal, a lot of them? And how many of you all have you may have not been funded one or more times. And you got a little, and that's to include myself. Early on in my career, I was writing grant proposals, I was working in the university sector, and there were quite a few that were not funded. One of the things that I did, I kept writing, and I kept attending workshops, and I kept looking on the internet to see what free services were out there. And then in 1996, I'm telling y'all how old I am, I started as a federal grant reviewer. And this is something that you may want to look into. If you want to learn what not to do in a grant proposal, then become a federal or state or an agency grant reviewer. Now back then, we were paid heavily. We were flown out to Washington, DC most of the time. And then maybe 10 years after that, they started doing Zoom, sessions over Zoom. But they're very strict. You read about 10 to 12 proposals within a week's time. It's a lot of reading, but it was extremely helpful for me. And after a while, I think maybe around 2008, I started, everything I was writing was funded. So I said, well, maybe I'm a professional now. And I was able to get funding for my nonprofit for 4 or 5 different school districts, $600,000 or more. And along the way, I should have told you some of the agencies I reviewed for. Of course, Department of Education, Department of Health and Human Services, Department of Energy, and some other ones. But the one that caught me by surprise was the Department of Treasury. And I thought, this is a setup. They're trying to trap me. But I went ahead and submitted, that was a request directly to me, and I did respond affirmatively, and I did review for Department of Treasury. I didn't even know that existed, that grants existed through them. But at any rate, I added the last piece because I work with a lot of young people and new grant writers who, after they have not been successful for a while, they sort of get weary and want to give up. They get discouraged. So I wanted to address that, and I'll have a QR code at the end so that you can see that. So this is that one slide that when you are writing any type of grant proposal, the pieces have to fit. They have to flow, they have to make sense, so that everything is going to, once you get to the evaluation component, the last section, everything just simply has to show that you have a strong performance-based document. And this has to do with for-profit grants or whatever, nonprofit or organizations. So we're looking at the key connections in a proposal. Basically includes your needs section, your objective, your plan, your evaluation, and there may be some other ones depending on the agency request for a proposal. But you want to, again, make sure that those are linked. And sometimes repetition is a good thing, because a funding agency, they're very shrewd, they're very particular, and they know what they want to see in your grant proposal. And therefore, sometimes, if you look at what those key goals are for that organization, and a lot of times they will even identify those, they may want to see you incorporate that more than once. What I do with regard to the abstract, which, as you all know, is the first, pretty much that first one-page document in your proposal, I write it last. You found that to be helpful. Write it last, because you will have already written 100% of your proposal. So your needs section, if you know that, if you just say if you're writing a community-based proposal and you have identified through a survey or whatever with the organization that only 50% of residents in that small community or large or citywide graduate from high school. So I'm saying 50%, that's kind of low, it's much higher than that. But you want to find out what the needs are in your community. And you showing data based on those needs. And you include your sources, indicating where you found the data. Is it in the Census Bureau? Is it some state agency? But those needs have to be connected to your objectives. And your objectives are connected to your goals. And again, those are outlined in the request for application or the request for a proposal. But I know most of you all know this, but I want to reiterate how important it is for those to be linked, because as a grant reviewer, I've seen where people say, apparently to themselves, oh, we need to do this for the community, and we need to do that, and there's no data to back it up. There's no sources to show how relevant that is, regardless of the fact that I know in my small rural community that there's a high percentage of people with diabetes, high blood pressure, the health disparities that are all in the wrong direction. I know that because I know a lot of the people. But if I'm writing a grant proposal based on that, I still have to incorporate data and incorporate the sources within the grant proposal. And then the plan of action, what you intend to do, relates to those as well. In order to help our community increase the graduation rate, right? Here's what we intend to do. So in your writing, remember that your reviewers are not reading your minds. They want to see that you have incorporated within your plans from the needs section. And not only that, here's another mistake that grant writers make. They will say, well, I think that we need to have career days, and we need to have more SAT prep or more after-school tutoring, which is true. Nowadays, the landscape is different with respect to grant writing in that you are required to use research-based findings to say, here are some best practices when it comes to after-school tutoring. So best practices, what the research says, is what you have to include. So even though the thought process is correct, that we need to have after-school tutoring and we need to do this, that, and the other, you still have to be, cognizant of the fact that you have to use best practices. And you find that via some research engine, right? Publications, federal, state documents, and other philanthropic documents as well. The Rand Foundation and Pew, just some other areas. And then, of course, one of the big components is how are you going to show in your proposal that the work, if you're funded, whatever you're going to do is going to benefit, that you're going to be able to show how you accomplish your goals. So you have to have a strong evaluation component. And that's where a lot of people call me in on, and other professional grant writers, because that is a section that has to include both qualitative and quantitative information. And unless you've been doing that quite a bit, it can be rather challenging to do, but it is a very important component to show that you need to evaluate what kind of surveys you will have for your children, for your parents, for your clients, for your customers. Have those surveys and make sure that you keep the data and incorporate it in your grant proposal. All right, so this is a slide that I just added, and all of these are things that people have been calling and requesting and asking. First and foremost, the first block there. At present, all organizations reliant on grant funding are facing anxiety, uncertainty, and fear. Everybody. We just don't know. We just don't know, to be honest with you. Because a lot of organizations, colleges, and universities have lost funding that they previously were funded. All right, they were awarded the funds. The funds, even they did the drawdowns, and the funds were in their accounts, and the money has been rescinded. So even state agencies are having to find in a very quick fashion how they're gonna pay their staff, their existing staff. They just gonna close the whole department or what? But it is a fact that some agencies and universities had grant funding, it was taken back. So that first issue is what I've been dealing with constantly for the past, I'll say 6 weeks. All right, now I'm gonna try to give some hope. So at the same time, businesses and organizations are gearing up for a time when we will go back to having some grant funding, when social programs are important, right? They're getting ready for it. And I won't go through all of this. I'll be happy to send you all, have Randolph to send the presentation out if you want it. But even a client that I had 20 years ago at a university in Texas who had just started her career as a coordinator of a program, and I went out, did some training with them. She's now dean at the university and an excellent writer. She's doing great. She called me. I said, I haven't heard from you in 20 years. They are afraid, right? But what they are doing is placing significant emphasis on grants. They want more professional development because, as you all know, a lot of people are losing their jobs, but also a lot of younger people are doing very well on social media. My nephew and niece, Color Me Courtney, Color Me Paris, and now they got a baby, Color Me Baby, killing it on social media, so much so that they paid off the house in Palm Springs and the condo or whatever in Manhattan. And she was on Kelly Clarkson yesterday. How do they do this? I know what they're doing, I just can't do it. I see what they're doing, right? So a lot of younger people are taking advantage of the social media, ways to make money on social media. And the unfortunate thing is there's a high turnaround for employees in a lot of organizations. So what happens is that some of the stronger grant writers are leaving to take management positions or positions someplace else. So there's a high turnover rate. I think I mentioned that. AI is beginning to gain momentum in grants writing. I know I have 5 more minutes, so I'm gonna hurry up. But there's gonna be some announcements made from the administration about some changes. So people in the grants world are not sure whether or not those are gonna be challenging or good changes. But just know this, even a law firm that I worked with thought they could just use AI to write some grant proposals. It's not that simple. It's easy if you can't get your thoughts together to put in a question in there and get some feedback, but always rewrite it. All right, so the 2024 CR 200 regulations, if you aren't familiar with those, that's a federal regulation and it's updated, but it has to do with how you're gonna spend these folks' money, how you're gonna comply with it, and so forth and so on. This QR code hopefully will go to that article on the resilience of grant writers. But Randolph, how do I click that most in-demand grant management consulting request? Because that is, okay.
It says it can't open specific file.
Okay, it's on the flash. But anyway, if you all want that, that's a document that I developed because I would have calls from clients, potential clients. Well, what is it that you do? How can you help us? And they really are unable to clearly articulate what their needs are. So it helps to have a long conversation. And I developed this one document that sort of details 7 areas, including training, professional development, and that's what I prefer to do. If I get called in as a consultant, I prefer to train everybody. In one of my last situations, we trained the administrative assistant who turned out to be an excellent grant writer. And at first, the dean said, well, we just want to train the coordinators. We don't want to train any administrative assistants. And I said, no, because those are the people who are going to stay there and go up the ladder. So you want to think in terms of training everyone, including everyone, even if they just edit, but they are learning when they're editing the document.
And what y'all can do, anybody that wants the documents that she's talking about, just text the number where we be texting you, the updates, the non-spam marketing reminders. Just text that number and we'll send you that document. Does anybody have any questions for Dr. Shandra?
Yes. How have you seen the AI being used in a very productive way? How does that work?
Right. So his question is, how has I seen AI working in a productive way in grants? So last April, I was invited to work with a firm, and it was on a Department of Energy grant, and it was a $20 million grant. So we did 2 of them. And I'm gonna be honest with you, they just kind of left me hanging. I mean, we was a team, but then you ever been in school and you have a group assignment and it's like people back out and you end up doing, and I was like, this is not fair. I never written that particular proposal before. Now they were funded, they were both funded. So going back to how AI was used, by the end of August, early September, I was burnt out. I was just burnt out, y'all. So I was like, I gotta try this AI thing. And I would type in some of those questions, whatever the heading was, just to see where they were coming from, the thought process, and it helped significantly. But I knew once I got that paragraph that I needed to go back and rewrite that paragraph. Read it. I kept reading and reading until I got it. AI has been extremely helpful for that particular grant program because in that one we had to involve attorneys, engineers. I don't know anything about the engineering world, but I had to rewrite what they told me. Not only that, but just a lot of machinery, just air conditioning, equipment, lighting, just, totally remodel this one organization. We had to go back and look at what the city and state guidelines were for that particular project, and I used AI to look all of that up, because that was, I'm an educator.
Is that pretty accurate?
It was pretty accurate. I used my skills to, my background knowledge to put the whole proposal together in a way that it flowed. Okay.
Thank you so much for the information. When you're a nonprofit and you're looking for a grant writer, a professional grant writer, what is the most important thing? You said you're out of the Alabama market. If you were to write for Jacksonville, is that recommended, or do you need to find someone who is local to do your grant writing?
You don't, because I've written from West Virginia, Florida, Georgia, Alabama, Minnesota, Arkansas, so it doesn't matter. A person with, their expertise, they're going to know that they need to research whatever the state, that particular state, their regulations are. And there are a lot of differences.
But I want you to give it up one more time for Dr. Shandra Williams.
Thank you, guys.